My name is Lucille. I am 67 years old, and I carry in my hands the mark of someone who sowed the lives of others for a long time. I was a wife for 40 years, a widow for 12, mother of 2 men that I raised with effort and faith, each with a different piece of my heart. But tell me, what would you do if your own child was between life and death, and just in time to save him, a child revealed something that would change everything? It may seem absurd, I know. And maybe you're thinking, did I get it right? Yes, you understood. Because sometimes we do everything. We even donate our bodies. And even so, he doesn't see the soul of those next to him. I thought donating a kidney was my final act of love, until I realized they were using me, and that my grandson, a boy of only 9 years old, was the only one who had the courage to open his mouth. This story is not about medicine. It's about truth, about masks falling in front of scalpels, and about how an old woman like me can still surprise. Because in that hospital, everything fell apart before anesthesia. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. I was lying on the stretcher, with that white light blinding me, the sound of the devices around me and the nurse's voice saying it would be fast. I just needed to relax. But it was at that second, exactly at that second, that the door opened violently, and my grandson, Mario, ran in. "Grandma, wait! I know why Daddy's sick," he shouted with a force that didn't match his 9-year-old's. Sweaty, wide-eyed, and his broken cell phone in his hands, he trembled all over. The room froze. All faces turned to him. The anesthesiologist stopped. The doctor frowned. I could only stare, with my heart beating like never before, because there, at that moment, I understood that everything was going to change. If you've come this far, it's because something inside you has also felt this tightness. So, if you can, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It's just a gesture, but for me it's like a silent hug before opening a chest of difficult memories. This story is not easy to tell, but with you here, I feel less alone to remember. Before everything went wrong, my life had a certain rhythm. It was simple, yes, but it had a good heat that only people who have lost know how to value. I would get up early every day, make my strong coffee in the old coffee pot, the one with the glass cracked on the handle, and sit down for a while to read my devotional before starting the day. I sewed to order, no big deal, but I helped pay for the medicines of my late George, who was bedridden for almost 10 years after the second stroke. I cared for him as I cared for my young children, with tenderness and patience, even on nights when he forgot my name. It's funny how love ages along with us. It changes shape. It ceases to be a flower and becomes a root. And I had deep roots in that house, in that life. I have never been a woman to complain. I just asked God to give me strength and a little health to see my boys do well. Adam was always the most smiling, the most impulsive as well. Brian was born old, serious, hardworking, quieter. A good son, but distant. Each one in their own way gave me reason to continue. When George left, the house was muted. The radio was still on. The wall clock was ticking, but the sound of it calling me. This one disappeared. That's when I started spending more time with Adam and his family. Rachel was a kind daughter-in-law at first. He said I was like a second mother. He hugged me, offered me tea. Mario, the grandson, was my light in the dark days. That boy, so smart. So sweet. She called me Grandma Lou, with an affection that made me forget the pain in my legs. I went to their house every week to take a pie, some frozen lunch boxes that I prepared with the rest of the market. Sometimes, I also took a new rug that I sewed myself, just to change the environment. I've always been one of those. When I can't change the pain, I change the curtains. Rachel complimented, put things in place, smiled, but gradually her words began to change their tone. Small corrections, comments about what Mario could or could not eat, what was a thing of the time of his generation, Lucille. I laughed the first few times. I thought it was a young man's freshness. But then came the control. It was so subtle that for a long time I didn't notice. One day, I got there with a shopping bag, and Rachel said she didn't need it anymore. "We want to get a better handle on Adam's diet," she said, with an icy smile. Another time, I came in with the apple pie he loved, and she said, "Oh, Lucille, the doctor cut out his sugar. I should have warned you before bringing it." But no one had warned me anything. And Adam quietly just nodded, as if he was no longer the one in charge of his own house. I kept going, because I thought it was just a phase, a stress of marriage or work. I refused to see what was there. It's hard to admit that, but sometimes we prefer comfortable deception to painful truth. I remember a specific Sunday. They invited me to lunch. The table was set. Everything was too beautiful, as if it were for an illustrious visitor, not for me. Rachel coordinated everything, where each one sat, what each one ate, even how Mario should behave. He was so silent that day. He looked at me with those big eyes, and I noticed a certain fear there. When I went to get more rice, Rachel said in a sweet but firm tone, "Watch out for the salt, Lucille. We are trying to keep the environment healthy." I blushed. I looked at Adam, expecting him to say something, but he only lowered his eyes to the plate. It was on that day that I felt, for the first time, that something was out of place, but I kept silent, as I have kept silent so many times, because that's what we learn, right? Not to make a scandal, to endure in silence, to be useful, without being bothersome. But inside me, something began to creak. My days are back to being more at home. Fewer invitations, fewer visits, and when I called, it was Mario who answered. Sometimes she would say to me quietly, "Mom said it's not a good time." At other times he would whisper, "I wish you would come." But they never asked me directly. Only when Adam got worse. He began to become weaker, pale. Rachel called me one day, crying, "Adam's bad, Lucille. You need to come." I went, without batting an eyelid. I arrived and found my son on the couch, thin, tired. Mario was huddled in the corner of the room. Rachel hugged me tight and said, "It's kidney, final stage, and your kidney is the only compatible one." At that time, I didn't think twice. Of course I would. What else could I do for a child I carried in my womb? But inside, something didn't fit. It was as if there was a shadow in that house, as if someone was always watching. You know, there are days when I wake up wondering if this all started when my husband left. Or was it before, and I didn't want to see it? We think we love unconditionally, until love was used as currency. Allow me to pause here, because maybe you, who are listening to me, have also experienced something similar. Have you ever been put aside by someone you raised with all love? Have you ever felt that your value has been reduced to a function, a utility? If you've ever felt that, he comments below with an "I believe," or a "I've lived that." Sometimes, knowing that we are not alone, it's what keeps us standing. But what really made me wake up was yet to come. Because in the midst of that silence disguised as routine, a small gesture from Mario showed me that the truth really lives in the details. And it was at that moment, in a whisper in the hallway, that the first crack of the lie appeared. Can you imagine what a 9-year-old might discover? That an adult hid so well? It was on a cloudy Thursday that everything began to weigh differently. I had gone to bring Adam a chicken broth. He always liked mine with carrots and leeks. And I noticed that Rachel didn't look at me properly when I opened the door. Before, she came to greet me with a smile, a tight hug. But this time she just said a dry, "You can come in," while keeping her eyes glued to the cell phone. I left the food on the kitchen counter and went straight to Adam's room. He was lying down, pale, as usual, but he looked a little groggy, as if he had just woken up from a bad dream. I asked him if he wanted me to heat the soup, and he just moved his head, almost without force. As I left the room, I heard Rachel talking to someone on speakerphone, her voice low but firm. "Not yet. First I need to secure the signature, then we talk about the numbers." Numbers? What numbers? I froze there, standing in the hallway with my hand on the railing and my heart beating faster. But when she saw me, she hung up right away and faked a smile. It was from the health plan, Lucille. No big deal. And I, silly, nodded, even though I knew there was something wrong with that smile. That night, Mario came to visit me alone. He came with sad eyes, dragging his feet as if carrying a secret too heavy for his age. He sat on the chair on the porch and stared at me in silence. Only after a while did she say, "Grandma, why does Mom hide the pills inside the vitamin bottle?" I froze. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. And he replied, "I saw it. She opened the 2 jars and exchanged some capsules. Then I said it was not to forget." I swallowed hard. I tried to disguise it. I said that maybe it was an adult thing, that sometimes we organize the medicines in a different way. But inside, a stone formed in my chest. Children don't lie like that, and Mario has always been attentive, observant, of those who notice what adults think is hidden. The next day, I went to the neighborhood pharmacy and discreetly asked about the pills Adam was taking. The pharmacist, a young lady named Lydia, said that the ones in the prescription had nothing to do with the ones I saw at their house the week before. They were smaller, of different color. I left there with my head spinning. I started to put the pieces together, remembering the times Rachel would say he was worse, even when Adam said he was fine. I remembered Sunday lunch, when she said, "Lucille, you still have use. Let's use this wisely." At the time, I thought it was a joke. But now that sentence sounded like a sentence. Her parents were also always there, circulating as if they owned the place. Rachel's mother lived with a clipboard, writing down schedules, exams, medications. His father, a tall and quiet gentleman, spent his time checking papers in Adam's office. When I got there the other day, I found them locked inside. He said he had gone to take an order of rugs. A lie. I just wanted to see how my son was doing, and they told me to wait in the living room. I heard a phrase that was recorded. "She needs to sign soon. We are at the limit of clinical time." They didn't call me Mother, Lucille, or anything. Just she, the donor, the compatible body, the piece of meat that still worked. I felt like an old piece of furniture, which is still good for something, but will soon be discarded. Adam, poor thing, was so weak that he barely talked. I began to notice that he was shaking after taking the pills, that he was sleeping soundly, as if blacking out for hours. And every time I asked, Rachel said it was the disease, that the body was tired, but nothing made sense. Nothing matched what I knew about medicine from the time I took care of George. That wasn't just the disease. There was more, and it was on one of those nights, alone in my bed, that I began to pray. Not a beautiful prayer, one of those in church. It was a whisper between me and God. If there's something hidden, show me. It gives me eyes to see what they're trying to hide, because my mother's heart already knew. They were deceiving me, and the worst, they were using my love as a weapon. The next day, Mario appeared again. He didn't say anything. He just handed me a drawing. It was him, me, and Adam, the three of us holding hands, and a red heart between us. But the side of the heart where Adam was, it was streaked with black. "Why did you draw like that, dear?" I asked. And he, with his eyes full of water, replied, "Because Dad's heart is no longer good, Grandma. You're sick of lies." I didn't know what he meant, but at that moment, I knew that the truth was going to come from where no one expected. And I wonder, what leads a woman to manipulate even someone's illness? What could she gain from this? And will my son? Did you know everything? Days after that conversation with Mario, I was called to a meeting at Adam's house. Rachel said it was important. I arrived with a heavy heart, feeling that something heavy was coming. They were all in the living room, her parents, and my son, sitting on the couch, with that lost look that already hurt me just to see. Rachel stood up with a blue briefcase in her hands, placed it on the table, and said, "Lucille, the tests have confirmed it. Your kidney is the only compatible one. It's you, or no one." Her voice was firm, emotionless, like someone presenting a report, not a life choice. Her father, a man who had barely spoken to me before, stood up and said, "You raised him. He fed, cared for, taught how to walk. Now the time has come to save him." I was silent for a few seconds. I tried to breathe. I looked at Adam for any sign of himself, my boy, my son, but he only muttered, "Mom, you're going to save me, right?" As if he were reading the script she delivered. I tried to say that I needed to think, that it was a delicate decision, but before I could complete the sentence, Rachel interrupted me. "Lucille, it's not about you. It's about your child's life. You don't need to think. You just need to do it." And there, in that room that was once full of good memories, I felt like an old piece of furniture being pushed into the corner. My word was worth nothing. My feelings, even less. It was as if the simple fact of having a functioning body automatically turned me into an obligation. They began to discuss among themselves the deadlines for the surgery, the dates of exams, the rest that I would have to do afterwards. And I was there, silent, without being consulted. Rachel even turned to me and said, with that smile that froze, "Oh, and let's adjust your diet. We need you to be clean for the procedure." I wanted to ask, clean of what? of emotion, of thought, but I swallowed hard. At that dinner, days later, I felt like a shadow. Rachel already decided everything: the menu, the layout of the table, what I could or could not drink. Avoid soda, Lucille. It can affect the kidneys. I didn't react. I just lowered my eyes and continued fiddling with the plate. Everything in me screamed for dignity, but I didn't want to cause it. Not at that time. I had no strength. Mario looked at me from time to time, confused, as if he felt that something was wrong, but not knowing where to put that feeling. On the way home, I cried in silence on the bus seat. My knees hurt, my chest burned, and I could only think of one phrase that kept popping into my head. It's your duty as a mother. They told me that with such certainty, as if love had to be measured by sacrifice, as if being a mother would give every last part of yourself, even when the other has already forgotten who you are. And I wondered, since when does loving mean erasing oneself completely? I didn't sleep properly for days. I looked at the dark ceiling of my room and heard those phrases repeating in my head again. She remembered Adam as a boy, running around the yard with his pants falling down, and trying to put that memory together with the blacked-out man on the couch. Did he really believe that? Or did he just repeat what they said to him? What if I refused? Would he still call me Mom? The following Sunday, I brought them a simple cake. When I entered the house, I realized that I was no longer welcome. Everything seemed timed, millimetrically calculated. Rachel had already changed even the pictures on the wall. Her parents were in Adam's room, as usual, and she, in a sweet, firm voice, said, "Thank you, Lucille. But cake has a lot of sugar, remember?" And he took the plate from my hand, as if taking something improper. I just smiled and sat next to Mario, who didn't even look at me properly. He was strange, too quiet, with her eyes downcast, as if she were keeping a secret that is difficult to hold. It was at that moment, there in that room, feeling that not even my food was accepted anymore, that I understood. I was no longer a mother, nor a grandmother. I was a donor, one piece, a number, and all they did was push me to give in. But something inside me started to light up, a dim light still, but stubborn, because I knew that if I shut up completely, I would disappear for good. But what I didn't know yet was that the real bomb was much closer than I imagined, and that it would come not from adults, but from someone much smaller, with attentive eyes and a pure heart. Can you imagine what a child can keep when no one is paying attention? I hadn't seen Adam for 2 days. I decided to go there with some new towels that I had embroidered myself, just to have an excuse. I entered slowly, as if asking permission in his own history. The house was strange, too silent, as if someone had turned off the sound of life inside. I saw Rachel alone in the kitchen, with her hair tied up high and a glass of wine in her hand, even though it was still morning. She feigned surprise when she saw me. "Lucille, that's good." It came at the right time, and he took me straight to the bedroom. Adam was lying down, eyes half open, but distant. His skin was a grayish color. The room smelled of strong medicine. Before I could get closer, I saw Rachel taking a blue pill from her pocket and throwing it into the glass of water. I didn't say anything, waited. When she went to offer the cup to Adam, I asked in a thin voice, "What is this medicine, Rachel?" She turned to me with that usual smile and said, "It's just a supplement, don't worry." But I worried. I worried like someone who sees smoke and smells burning. That afternoon, Mario showed up at my door. He had a drawing in his hands and a look too heavy for his age. He sat on the sofa in the living room and stayed there quietly. I sat down next to it and said, "Come on, honey." He took a while, but when he opened his mouth, he was direct. "Grandma, Mom says that after you donate the kidney, everything will change." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked. And he added, "She said the data is going to be worth a lot of money." I heard her saying that on the phone. Then she saw that I was close and told me to leave. I wanted to hold the world in that instant, to prevent it from collapsing on top of me. His head was spinning. Data? Money? What kind of data could such a surgery generate? Even so, I didn't say anything. I looked at him, held his little hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me." But inside, my soul screamed. I refused to believe it completely, because to accept that was to admit that my son was in the middle. It was imagining that he knew, or allowed. That's it. That was still too much for me. That night, I made my dinner in silence. Thin soup, stale bread toasted on the stove, like in the times when George and I were in a pinch. And just as I sat down to eat, I heard the door slam. It wasn't beaten. It was invasion. Rachel entered without calling. Without looking to the side, he placed an envelope on the kitchen table and said, "Sign. Let's put an end to it." I stared at her without understanding. She didn't even wait for a response. He just turned his back and left. The envelope was left there, standing like a trap. In it, the consent form. My name was already printed, as if everything had already been decided, as if I was just a signature, and not a whole life behind it. I sat right there and cried, not as a child who screams, but as old people who get tired. The tears flowed slowly, and I didn't even try to wipe it off, because there is pain that we need to drop. And at this moment, if you're still here listening to me, I'm here opening my heart, telling this story that not even my soul wanted to remember. If you can, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just for me, it's for all the women who have been treated as invisible, because I still have a lot to tell you. That paper was still there, and I felt that if I touched him, some part of me was going to die. But still, something held me. Maybe fear, maybe guilt, or maybe hope. The hope that my son would wake up, look at me and say, "Mom, I'm sorry," but he didn't say. And the next time I saw him, he was already being prepared for the hospital. But what no one counted, it's just that before the anesthesia needle touched my arm, a tiny voice was going to make the whole world stop. And when she spoke, no one else could pretend they didn't know. Want to know what Mario revealed in that room? So listen to what comes next. Because the truth, when it comes out of a child's mouth, there is no way to hide it anymore. That night, I didn't sign. The paper was still on the kitchen table, right next to the coffee-stained tablecloth. I walked around the house in silence, as if trying to hear answers on the walls. The dim light of the lamp in the hallway cast long shadows that danced slowly. Every corner of the house reminded me of a life that was no longer mine. I ran my fingers over the frame of the wedding portrait with George, remembered the smell of his aftershave and the way he called me, my girl, even when I already had wrinkles on my hands. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the noises of the night. The ticking of the living room clock, the wind touching the shutter, the creaking of the old floor. But the sound that hurt the most was that of my own breathing, heavy, lonely, as if I were standing there trying to convince myself that it still mattered. I wanted just one word. One. That someone would look at me and say, "You have a choice." But no, everything was already decided. Rachel returned the next day, this time accompanied by her parents. They didn't even knock. They entered as if they were owners. Her mother looked me up and down, put her bag on the table and said, "Lucille, we need to talk seriously." The father folded his arms and stood by the door like a prison guard. Rachel sat with her leg crossed, looked directly at me and said, "We are worried. Your hesitation is putting Adam's life at risk. Do you understand that?" I didn't answer. I just lowered my eyes, but they continued. "This is no time for selfishness," said the mother. "You're the only one who can save him." "There's no more time for doubts or melodrama," Rachel added. "My patience has a limit, Lucille. We are past the point of choice. Now it is an act of love or a crime by omission." That cut me off. I felt like I was being judged as a criminal for wanting to think, because I want to feel, for wanting to exist as more than a piece in their puzzle. I got up slowly, took a deep breath and went to the table. I took the envelope with the papers and held it in my hands. The leaves were cold, and their weight was more than anything I had ever carried. I looked at each one of them and said, "Give it to me until tomorrow." Nobody liked it. Rachel grumbled. Her father snorted. The mother said, "Lucille, this is not a decision. It is an obligation." But I repeated, "See you tomorrow." They left without saying goodbye. I closed the door calmly and went straight to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the dresser drawer and took out my old diary, a simple notebook, worn leather cover, where I wrote only when my heart could no longer fit in my chest. I wrote with a trembling hand, "Am I saving my son or killing myself?" The words seemed to hurt the paper. Tears dripped over the lyrics, but it was necessary to put it out. I tried to pray, but the prayer did not come. I could only look at the ceiling and silently ask, "Show the truth, Lord. If I'm wrong, it gives me peace. If I'm right, it gives me courage." Because deep down, I felt it. I felt that there was more behind it all, something they weren't saying, something I was only going to find out if I resisted a little longer. And it was on that night, in that heavy silence, that I understood. The fear they had was not of my refusal, it was of time, because time reveals. Time shows who is who, and sometimes, one night is enough to dismantle an entire lie. Could it be that that morning, while they slept peacefully, was the truth already beginning to flow through some crack? That afternoon, still sitting in my kitchen, with the consent papers on the table, I heard the doorbell ring. It was Brandon, my youngest son, with a serious face and eyes that wouldn't let me lie to myself. He came in quickly, took an envelope from his backpack and handed it to me without saying a word. When I opened it, I felt my hands tremble. There were pictures. Photos of Rachel, my daughter-in-law, handing a bag to a hooded man in the hospital parking lot. The images were blurred by movement, but clear enough for me to recognize every detail. Brandon spoke softly, but firmly, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Mom, there's something wrong with Adam's meds. It's not just a disease." My heart raced. Each knock seemed to hammer my head as I held the envelope as if it was the last thing I had left. I tried to take a deep breath, but it was impossible. The feeling of betrayal overwhelmed me. For a moment, I wanted to refuse everything, to escape from that world that seemed ready to swallow me. Brandon continued, "I followed her yesterday, Mom. I saw every movement, every detail. It's not paranoia. Something very wrong is happening. I wanted to close my eyes, forget everything, but I couldn't. It was reality screaming in front of me. My whole body trembled. Every memory of trust, every forced smile from Rachel, every time Adam asked me for help, turned into a shadow of doubt and fear. And at that moment, one thing was clear. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. It was not an exaggeration. It was pure treason. And worse, I was within my own family. That night, Mario returned to my house. He entered slowly, holding an old cell phone with a cracked screen. She looked at me with those eyes so small and so wise at the same time and said, "Grandma, I recorded Mommy. She said that with her kidney, the data from the experiment will be worth 100 times more." My body froze. I felt as if someone had turned off the light inside me and left only the darkness. I hesitated before touching the device, trying to prepare myself for the truth I knew I was about to hear. When I finally pressed play, Rachel's voice echoed clear and cold across the room, even if whispered, each word cutting through my heart. "With her kidney, the dice will be worth so much more. Don't worry, she won't refuse." Each syllable was an invisible blade. I couldn't move. My heart seemed to stop, and a wave of anger, fear, and disbelief overwhelmed me at the same time. It was real. Everything I feared and imagined had been confirmed. I looked at Brandon and Mario. Both were tense, but firm. Brandon was holding my hand, and I could feel his force trying to convey calm to me as my mind swirled in turmoil. Mario, so small and fragile, was the one who had discovered the truth. A 9-year-old child, seeing through the facade of falsehood and greed, bringing to light that which no one else dared to face. I felt a mixture of pride and terror, proud because my grandson had enough courage to face the adults in the situation. Terror, because he knew how dangerous this revelation could be, especially for Adam. My whole body stiffened. I knew that this discovery would change everything. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, the envelope with the photos next to me, and the old cell phone in my hands. My heart was still racing, but now there was something else. Clarity. I could no longer ignore. I could no longer give in to pressure from Rachel and her parents. The story I was living was not just about donating a kidney. It was about protecting my son, protecting my dignity, and facing a conspiracy that hid behind smiles and sweet words. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a direction. I looked at my 2 children, and then at my grandson. Brandon was there, firm, like a wall that I could lean on my fragility. Mario, with his cell phone shaking in his hands, looked at me as if to say, "Grandma, now it's up to you." It was at that moment that I realized the most painful truth of all. I could no longer trust anyone except what I saw with my own eyes and felt with my own heart. The betrayal was documented, proven, and nothing Rachel said or did could erase it. And yet, the question burning my mind was inevitable. If all this was happening, what else didn't I already know? What else was hidden behind fake smiles and calculated words? Because deep down, Something told me that this was only the beginning of the revelation, and that the most shocking truth was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up early and prepared to go to the hospital. I took with me a small bag of food I made especially for Adam: vegetable soup, fresh bread, fruit that I had bought at the farmer's market the day before. I walked the streets of Springfield with slow steps, watching the sun rise over the old houses and feeling a strange chill in my chest. I needed to maintain the appearance of normalcy. I needed to appear calm, as if everything was under control. But inside, my heart was on fire. I knew that day would be decisive, that every step of mine could change the destiny of my family. Arriving at the hospital, I went through the reception and went straight to Adam's room. He was lying there, so thin, pale, and frail that he looked like a shadow of the boy I grew up watching run around the yard. His eyes lit up for a moment as he saw me, and I tried to smile back, keeping his voice steady. "I brought you food, my son." He mumbled a thank you, barely audible, and I sat down by the bed, carefully placing the bowl and bread next to him. As Adam tried to eat, I watched Rachel closely. Her every move was calculated, every gesture subtly full of vigilance. I watched as she discreetly grabbed a blue capsule and hid it, as if no one was looking. My stomach twisted, but I kept my expression calm. I needed to control my emotions. I needed to be ready for what would come next. My entire body was alert, every sense focused on every detail that could reveal the truth. When I finished serving Adam and made him comfortable, I got up and walked out of the room with silent steps, not realizing that I was watching her every move. As I returned to my home, the silence embraced me like a heavy blanket. I entered my small home, where each object told a story, and took a deep breath. His heart was still beating fast, but now there was clarity. I took my old diary and started writing. I wrote about everything, every moment of doubt, every sense of betrayal, every detail that Brandon and Mario had revealed to me. Then I went to the wooden box where I kept my most precious memories and put my wedding ring inside the sewing machine, as if I was protecting part of my life that no one else could touch. Then I took the old Bible that George gave me at our wedding and hid Mario's cell phone with the recording inside. I knew that this was my insurance, my silent testimony to the truth I was about to face. After arranging these protections, I sat down in front of the transplant papers. I took a deep breath and looked at every line, every signature I needed to put on. I didn't hesitate because I was giving in, or because I was afraid. I hesitated because I was setting the stage for the truth, because I needed to play their game to survive and protect me and Adam. Every word I signed was loaded with silent purpose. Every stroke of the pen was a strategic step. My whole body was tense, but my mind crystal clear. He knew that this act did not mean submission, but preparation. As I finished signing, a thought crossed my mind. It's amazing how life forces us to learn that courage isn't always about shouting. Sometimes it's about remaining silent and acting intelligently. If you've ever felt forced to give in to something that seemed inevitable, leave "I know how it is" or "I understand you" in the comments. I wanted someone to understand, even from a distance, that the weight we carry is sometimes silent, but immense. I stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and looked at every object around me, every memory of my life, every memory I'd built with hard work and love. I knew that the next day would require more than physical strength from me. It would require intelligence, patience, and, above all, courage. I was ready, because that signature I put on was not the end. It was the beginning of my silent plan to expose everything. I knew that in order to protect Adam and myself, I needed to get in the game, but keep my heart steady, my mind alert, and my soul intact. As I prepared to rest, with the dim light of the lamp illuminating the diary and consent papers, I couldn't help but wonder, if I had ever seen a betrayal unfold, what other truths were still hidden behind the smiles and sweet words. Something told me that the most shocking moment was yet to come, and that when it happened, none of us would come out unscathed. I felt it in the tips of my fingers, in the shiver of the back of my neck, in the tightness of my heart, and I asked myself, would I be able to face the truth without losing who I really am? I arrived at the hospital with a small suitcase, tightening the strap tightly, feeling each step as if it were an impossible weight to carry. I went straight to the pre-surgery, where the nurse was already waiting for me, instructing me in a calm but mechanical voice to take off my coat, put on the blue hospital dress, and lie down on the stretcher. That cold fabric seemed to swallow my body. Cold white lights fell on me, blinding my eyes and revealing every detail of the room. The instruments lined up, the monitors flashing, every wire and tube ready to pierce my body. The silence was deadly, heavy, as if every second would crackle in an eternity of pain. Rachel entered with her parents, impeccably dressed, as if they were going to a party. Their gazes were cold, calculated, and I could feel judgment hanging in the air. I lay down on the stretcher, my hands clenching the edge as if holding my own fate. I thought of George, my husband, who spent years bedridden, silent, while I carried the house and family on my shoulders. I thought of Adam, lying there in another room, fragile, trusting in my courage. I thought of Brandon, my youngest son, who had shown that strength hides in those we least expect, and of little Mario, who even at the age of 9, carried the truth in his eyes. I remembered my testament, the memories I kept, the engraving hidden in the Bible, the ring at the bottom of the sewing machine. Everything seemed to condense in an instant. I was about to be anesthetized, about to lose consciousness for a surgery that promised to save my son. But inside me, a knot of despair tightened, a feeling that I was about to die for a lie. And yet I didn't scream. I didn't react. I accepted fate, as I always have, with the quiet dignity I had learned to cultivate all my life. It was at that moment, when the cold of the room seemed to penetrate the bones, that the door exploded with force. A breath of cold air swept through the room, knocking over instruments, and all eyes turned to the entrance. Mario rushed in, sweaty, his sneakers covered in mud, his school uniform crumpled, and in his hands he held the old cell phone he carried as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. The deathly silence turned into instant chaos. I looked at him and knew, even before any words, that the truth was about to explode. What could a child reveal at that moment? What did he know that no one else dared to say? And I, lying on that stretcher, with the anesthesia seconds away from mastering me, wondered if the lie would finally be exposed, or if that would be my last conscious moment before fate decided for me. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. I saw my grandson, small, with eyes too big for his age, holding his cell phone tight and running straight to the head doctor before anyone could stop him. The whole room seemed trapped, the silence heavy as lead, as he approached, trembling with fear but determined. He handed the device to the doctor, and the recording began to play. Rachel's voice laughed, calculating and cold, saying, "With the old woman's kidney, the data from the experiment will be irrefutable." Each word reverberated like a blow to my chest. I felt shattered, and yet strangely calm, because the truth was there, naked and concrete. The doctor froze, the scalpel suspended in the air, the team paralyzed. Adam, lying next to him, thin, weak, began to cry softly, confused and frightened. Rachel tried to move forward to take her cell phone, but was stopped by a security guard who suddenly appeared, firm and impassive. I remained motionless, not uttering a word, staring at my daughter-in-law with a blank, almost dead stare, as if everything I knew had collapsed. And yet, something inside me lit up. For the first time, the eyes around me saw me not only as the kidney donor mother, but as a betrayed, deceived, and underestimated woman. I felt a wave of quiet power, a kind of justice that needed no shouting or violence, just the truth, and I knew. Now the tables had turned. That moment, with the recording echoing through the room and the confusion stamped on everyone's faces, showed me that the patience and silent attention of days, months, and even years had put me at the center of the scene, not as a victim, but as someone who had control. And deep down, a question burned in my mind. If everything that had been hidden so far had already come to light, what else could Rachel and her parents have tried to hide? The most shocking moment was yet to come, and I knew that when it happened, it would forever change the fate of everyone there. The chief physician asked everyone to leave the room for a few minutes. I was still lying on the stretcher, covered up to my chest, feeling the cold sweat run down the back of my neck. When they finally helped me up, she guided me into a small room with soft lighting and the smell of old paper. He closed the door, took a deep breath, and looked at me as someone carrying a truth too heavy to keep. "Lucille," You need to know something you've never been told. I sat slowly, my hands still shaking from fright, but my eyes steady, demanding the truth. She opened a thick folder, full of stapled sheets, signatures, and stamps. Rachel is not just here as Adam's wife. She is linked to a pharmaceutical company in Chicago, a laboratory that is being investigated by experimental studies without authorization. I felt the air disappear from the room, as if someone had closed all the windows of my soul. She continued, "What was going to happen here today? It wasn't just a transplant. It was part of a project of theirs. Your kidney would serve as a parameter of comparison in the data." Each word was like a nail driving deeper into the wood of my heart. She then put copies of emails, contracts, reports on the table. Rachel tried to erase everything, but he couldn't. I picked up the leaves slowly, even with trembling hands. I read passages such as ideal compatibility, clandestine protocol, validation with family patient. The doctor looked at me with compassion, but also with fear, as if she didn't know what my reaction would be. I took a deep breath and just said, "Thank you, doctor. Now I understand." And it was strange. The more the pain increased, the calmer I became. There is a point in life when we learn that, when the lie is revealed to be whole, fear gives way to force. And sometimes, this strength comes silently. I left the hospital without looking back. I walked along the sidewalk of Springfield as someone who carries two lives, the one he lived and the one he just woke up. When I got home, I went into the room, opened the drawer where I keep old documents, and took out a yellowed card. Richard Moore, lawyer, an old friend of my husband, someone who has always respected my family. I called and asked to be seen that same day. He didn't ask anything. He just said, "Come." I took with me the recording of Mario, the photos that Brandon took, and now, those contracts that the doctor gave me. Upon arriving, Richard greeted me with the same firm look he had at George's funeral years ago. I sat down before him, laid it all down on the table, and told the whole story without crying, without trembling, without looking away. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds, taking in every detail. Then he took a deep breath and said, "Lucille, this is serious. More serious than you think." I just nodded. I put my hand on the documents and pushed in his direction. "Now it's up to you." My voice came out firm, even though my body was tired. He took everything like someone holding dynamite. "I'll take care of it. And I promise, no one will silence you." As I left the office, I felt a light wind blow on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't struggling alone. There is a phrase that has been hammering inside me all the way back. Sometimes, when we think we have reached the end, God shows us that it was only the beginning of the turn. And as I walked under the orange sky of the late afternoon, a question began to grow inside me like a tree root breaking through the concrete. If Rachel was capable of all that, what else was she still hiding? The darker truth hadn't yet come out, and I felt like it was about to come out, in a way that no one there could have imagined. Richard called me 3 days later, in the heavy voice of someone who carries a secret he didn't want to discover. I went to his office with a restless heart, as if my legs knew before me that something terrible was about to be revealed. When I arrived, he wasted no time. He pulled out a brown briefcase, threw it on the table, and said, "Lucille, the lie is bigger than we thought." I sat down slowly, feeling that familiar squeeze rise up my chest, and opened the briefcase. The first photo was of an elderly, frail man with tired eyes. That's Rachel's uncle. He donated an organ and died 2 weeks later, under suspicious circumstances. My fingers trembled. Richard continued, "She was connected to the procedure, and this man's medical data was used by the same Chicago company." I felt a lump form in my throat. It was as if each piece of the last few weeks found its place in a cruel puzzle. He pulled out another document. Adam's medical record, with altered numbers, creatinine levels that did not match his history. This here was manipulated. Her son was sick, yes, but not in this critical state that they presented to justify the urgency of the surgery. I was paralyzed. The image of the small Adam, running with his knee scraped and asking to be held, came to my mind like a punch. It hurts when we find out that someone touched your child's fragility to profit from it. And to make matters worse, Richard opened another envelope and showed me an insurance policy. Rachel did it on Adam's behalf. If something happened to him in the post-operative period, she would receive a high amount. Very high. I closed my eyes, because the pain was too deep. so deep that it seemed to come from another life. Shortly after, Brandon showed up at the office, panting with a black briefcase in his hand. "Mom, I found this in the garage, inside an old box." He opened the briefcase, and documents fell out of it. Fake IDs, deposit statements that added up to values I had never seen, trips to Chicago twice a month, at times when Rachel said she was taking care of Adam at the hospital. There was also a notebook with short notes. Collection, April, compatible, validation, Lucille Clown's final key. My name underlined. And there, in that scribbled word, I realized that I wasn't just the mother they pressured. I was the missing piece to complete an entire scheme. I took that notebook in my hands and felt the texture of the cover, cold, rough. I don't know why, but at that moment, I remembered the sewing machine where I hid my ring, and I thought about how some memories stay inside us like little lighthouses. I paused for a moment, staring at Rachel's crooked letters, and my heart whispered, "Truth is like old sewing. Sooner or later, the wire breaks." If you've ever kept a memory so strong that even trying to forget it, it comes back with smell, color, and pain, comment here, "It's true," or "I understand you." Sometimes, sharing a piece of what we feel helps to lighten the weight. When I came to myself, Richard was still talking, but my mind was elsewhere. I saw my son, my little Adam, being turned into a research number, a laboratory statistic. I saw Rachel laughing in that recording that Mario brought me. I saw my grandson's desperation as he ran to save me. My throat burned. I held the briefcase tightly, as if it was going to keep me from falling, and I said the phrase I never thought I would say in my life. "This is not just a betrayal. This is a crime." Richard nodded. Brandon put his hand on my shoulder, and I felt for the first time that I wasn't fighting alone, that this family Rachel tried to destroy still had roots too strong to uproot. But as we collected everything, a question crossed me with the force of lightning. If Rachel was able to do this to her uncle, with Adam, me, how far would she have gone? What other piece of this cruel game was hidden, waiting for its time to emerge? Because I felt, deep in my soul, that the darkest part of this story hadn't yet come to light, and when it did, it would shake everything I thought I knew about this woman. I prepared dinner as I did in the old days, with the table set, the plates lined up, the white tablecloth that I only used on important occasions, and a silence that seemed to wait for something. I invited Adam, Brandon, Rachel, and her parents. Everyone accepted too quickly, as if they were sure that I would finally come to my senses. Rachel arrived with that rehearsed smile. Her parents came in looking at the house as if they were evaluating the value of each object, and Adam, my son, entered slowly, head down, with his face tired. I hugged him, felt his short breath on my shoulder, and led him to his chair, the same chair he sat in as a teenager, complaining that the world was unfair. I prepared his favorite dish, roast chicken with caramelized onion sauce, and served it with the same delicacy as always. Everyone ate in silence, a silence so dense that I could hear the sound of forks touching the cymbal, the slight dragging of chairs, even Rachel's suppressed breathing. I kept watching, just watching. Her eyes did not stop, watching, calculating, waiting for me to say something that would confirm the delivery of my kidney. And that's when I felt my heart firm, like when we hold a difficult seam and know that, even shaking, the hand goes to the end. When the last bite was taken, I calmly got up, went to the cupboard and took an envelope. I placed it in the center of the table. Heads turned at the same time. Inside was a copy of the pharmacist's contract, the recording of Rachel laughing about the old woman's kidney, and the insurance policy in Adam's name. I opened the envelope slowly, like someone who opens an old book in front of an audience that doesn't know whether to listen or to run away. He said in a serene but firm voice, "Funny, all this was done without my knowledge." Rachel tried to laugh, a short, nervous laugh, as if choking on her own lie. Her parents turned pale. Adam, seeing his name stamped on the insurance, choked for real, bringing his hand to his throat, as if the air had disappeared. Brandon stared at his brother with a mixture of pain and disbelief, but said nothing. There, the words were mine, only mine. I lifted the envelope a little more, for everyone to see, and spoke calmly, looking straight at Rachel, but not angry, just true. I ate quietly for a long time. Now, who's going to swallow hard? It's you. The silence exploded into millions of pieces inside the room. Rachel tried to justify herself, but her voice came out shaky, almost childish. The parents looked at each other, not knowing where to hide their shame. Adam cried, not a loud cry, but a deep cry, which only those who have ever felt betrayal recognize from afar. And I just stood with my hands firmly on the table, feeling the strength of my body, my history, my entire resistance. At that moment, I was not the donor. I was not the fragile old woman that they tried to manipulate. I was Lucille, mother, woman, survivor. But as they shifted uncomfortably, one question cut through my mind, like lightning. If this was what came to light, what was still hidden in the darkness? And what even greater truth was about to emerge when everyone thought that the night had already given everything it could? The morning after dinner, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, after years of living in silence, my soul had finally opened the window to breathe. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee, the same strong coffee that had always accompanied me on difficult days, and began to write the formal notification, revoking any and all medical authorization. Every word that trickled down on the paper seemed to take an old weight off my shoulders. I no longer owed anything to those who tried to make me an object. I signed my name firmly, as one who closes a door that will not be opened again. I handed the document directly to the hospital, and as the clerk read it, I felt the firm ground beneath my feet, as if every step I took that morning had been guided by something bigger. Then I went to Adam's house. Rachel tried to keep me out, but I pushed her aside with a simple movement, without raising my voice, without losing my composure. I passed by it as if passing by a shadow. I walked into my son's room and just said, "You're going to be transferred today." He looked at me with teary eyes, a mixture of regret and relief, and did not question. The new hospital was already warned, thanks to Richard's help, and I knew that there he would be protected. As the nurses began preparations for the transfer, I saw Rachel approaching Mario, trying to wrap him in a forced embrace, as if she wanted to regain control of the only thing that still seemed to slip through her fingers. I walked up to them slowly, with firm steps, and it only took a single glance from me for her to freeze. I put my hand on my grandson's shoulder and said, without even looking at her, "Come with me, dear." Rachel tried to argue, with that feigned tone of sweetness that no longer deceived anyone, but I kept walking, giving her no room to advance. The door was open. She stood still, motionless. I turned my face away for a last moment and said, "The house now has a name, and it's not yours." It was the first time I saw Rachel speechless, without a mask, no ground, and I realized that, for the first time, she understood that I was not going to back down. I left with Mario by my side, Adam being taken to the ambulance and a strange feeling of freedom. I filed a report against her parents for the coercion, the invasions, the objects they took from my house as if they were owners. Every step of mine that day seemed to undo an old tie, an invisible chain that I myself, without realizing it, had allowed to be placed on me over the years. But as I watched the ambulance leave, I felt something moving inside me, a question I couldn't shut up. If the truth had already destroyed so much, what was left to come to light? Because something told me that the worst secret, it was still hidden, waiting for the right moment to appear. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. After that dinner, everything began to crumble on their side, as if the walls of the castle Rachel had built had been erected with wet paper. The next day, she ran to the police station, trying to accuse me of alienation, of emotional manipulation, of being an old woman influencing the narrative, words that sounded so absurd that even the policeman raised his eyebrow. But when Richard handed over the emails, the recording, the pharmacist's contract, the insurance policy, and the folder of fake IDs, the police station room was as silent as a wake. There was nothing she could say. The truth, when it arrives in one piece, needs no defense. Her parents, who used to walk around my house as owners, lost the right to visit Adam. The new hospital was informed about the case, and the chief physician attached the evidence to the official report. The pharmaceutical company, upon learning that the name was involved in an investigation, canceled the project in less than 24 hours and sent Rachel a dry letter. "You are fired for ethical violation." Rachel lost access to the joint account she had with Adam, because the justice system blocked everything until the end of the investigation. She tried to return to his house, but found the lock changed. He tried to appeal to his parents, but they themselves were responding for appropriation and coercion. Finally, with no money, no support, and no masks, she ended up evicted from the small apartment where she lived before the wedding. I heard that he spent days sleeping in the car, but that was no longer up to me. Every choice has a price, and she finally found hers. Meanwhile, Adam, my son, when he knew everything, when he saw for himself the evidence that his own brother and his own son had helped to gather, it was as if the ground opened up under his feet. He went into a deep sadness. The world he knew collapsed all at once. The wife, the confidence, the illness that wasn't as serious as he was made to believe, and the weight of what he almost allowed to happen to me. On the third day after the hospital transfer, my home phone rang. I attended slowly, thinking it was some doctor, but it was him. Her voice is low, broken, like that of a lost boy. Mother, I was stupid. I was weak. I was silent. Not out of contempt, but because that pain of his did not fit in any sentence that I could offer. It was the kind of regret that one needs to feel to the bottom to learn to breathe again. He cried. She cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was 8 years old, when she broke her arm and was afraid to enter the X-ray room. I heard. I just heard. When he finally managed to breathe again, he said, "I almost let you die. And why? You're welcome. By someone who didn't even love me." My voice came out firm, but without harshness. "Now you have the chance to be a man. Use it well." I didn't say I forgave him, nor that he did not forgive, because there are things that cannot be solved with a sentence. Life teaches in its own time. He was quiet on the other side. "I think you understood. I think that, for the first time, he heard me as a mother, and not as the inexhaustible source of sacrifices that he thought I was." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. Rachel, her parents, the lie, the whole castle, everything was falling apart. But make no mistake, when a castle falls, it usually reveals what was buried under the rubble. And I was sure that the darkest part of this story still had to be discovered, because everything that has come to light so far, it was just the surface. And I felt, in my chest, in my thoughts, in the silence of the house, that the cruelest secret was yet to appear. After everything that happened, I thought my heart would finally rest, but I discovered that justice is also a kind of path, one of those that we walk slowly, looking around, with fear and hope at the same time. Richard, the lawyer, called me one cold morning when I was still trying to adjust the blanket on my feet. He said, "Lucille, we've started the process. Embezzlement, medical fraud, elder abuse, everything will be investigated." I closed my eyes and gave a small silent thanks. It was not victory. It was just the beginning of a necessary adjustment. A few days later, they started calling me from the newspaper. The story had spread throughout the city, and when I saw my name emblazoned in the Springfield Gazette, I almost dropped my cup of coffee. The title said, "Woman gives love, but almost loses her life for trusting too much." I stared at those words for long minutes. I didn't cry. He doesn't smile. I just felt a kind of old emptiness unraveling inside me, as if someone had finally seen the woman I've always been. But I refused all the interviews. I didn't want to become a spectacle. My life had already been exposed too much inside that operating room. I went back to living in my simple way. I took the sewing machine out of the closet, wiped it with a cloth, and let the noise of the needle cut the silence of the house. Strange how certain sounds return us to our own body. I also started walking in Washington Park, the same way I did when my husband was still alive. I sat on our usual bench, the worn wooden one near the lake, and let the icy wind hit my face. In this piece of life, I learned that sometimes we only continue to stand because the habit of being strong pushes us forward. The police opened an investigation against the clinic that almost performed the surgery. They discovered grotesque flaws in the protocol. Doctors who turned a blind eye, documents that should be reviewed and never were. I heard that several employees were removed, and suddenly my name came out clean, squeaky clean, like a freshly rubbed plate in the sink. Even the prosecutor commented on the radio, "If it weren't for this lady's grandson, we could be dealing with a tragedy." When I heard this, I clutched my chest and whispered, "Thank you, my boy." And there was a moment, as I walked back from the park with cold hands and a warm heart, when life seemed to whisper in my ear, "Lucille, you thought it was over, but there is still a long way to go." And I want you who are listening to me to feel that too, because sometimes what comes after the storm is not a rainbow, it's just a little bit of air. But this air is enough for us to continue. Despite the justice advancing, I remained silent. A firm silence, different from the silence of fear I had lived before. It was a silence that said, "I know who I am." I would go to the market, greet people, hold the bags slowly. Some came to hug me. They said I was strong, that Springfield needed to hear my story. I thanked him, but didn't say much. Strength is something that, when we talk too much, it escapes through the corners. I prefer to keep it in my chest, where no one moves. Adam began to improve at the new hospital. The doctor told me that he responded well to the actual treatment, which he should have received from the beginning. For the first few days, he seemed too embarrassed to look at me. But one afternoon, as I was arranging the flowers on the bedroom table, he said so quietly that he was almost confused by the noise of the dripping serum, "Mom, thank you." I just nodded slowly, not because I didn't want to hug my son, but because that gratitude needed to grow inside him first. And even with justice happening, with the newspapers talking, with people recognizing me on the street, I felt inside, deep down, that the hardest part was not over yet. The truth is that when a story like this comes to light, it never comes in one piece at once. There is always a trail, a hidden piece, a shadow behind the door waiting for the right time to appear. And I knew, from everything I've experienced, that the shadow had not yet shown its face. But the question I asked myself at that time was different, and it is this that will guide what comes next. What about when the power we overthrew tries to come back through the back door? Because he always tries. Always. So go with me, because what was about to happen would reveal the last thread of this web that almost killed me. When everything started to fall apart on their side, I realized something that took me many years to learn. People who build their lives on lies always pay a high price when the truth finally knocks on the door. Rachel tried to be quick, as she always was. She filed an urgent request in the family court, claiming that Brandon and I were taking Mario away from her, saying that it was all a big misunderstanding. But the judge, a serious, direct man, one of those who do not seem to be impressed by crying, denied it right away. He said that, given the ongoing investigations and the evidence that was already in the file, the child's well-being would be a priority, and that Mario would stay away from any environment that could compromise his emotional safety. When I heard that, my hands trembled, not for joy, but for a relief so deep, so old, that it seemed to come from all the times I remained silent, swallowing fear to protect those I loved. Rachel left the hearing crying, but they weren't mother's tears. They were tears of someone who lost control. Her parents didn't even show up. They were too busy responding to their own processes of coercion, fraud, and embezzlement. It was the first time I saw that whole family facing the real result of the choices they made. There was no screaming, no scandal, only silence, a falling silence, a silence of those who realized that no one else believed a single word of theirs. Meanwhile, Brandon has taken temporary custody of Mario. A 9-year-old boy shouldn't have gone through any of that, but he fit into our routine as if his heart had finally found a place where he could rest. Brandon bought him a new bed, painted the room a light blue, and told me, "Mom, this boy deserves peace." I only agreed with a nod. Sometimes when I saw my youngest son bathing his nephew, packing his school bag, reading a story before bed, I felt a warmth inside my chest that seemed to make my bones lighter. Adam was also on his way. The new doctor explained that the correct treatment was finally being done, and that despite the lost time, there was a real chance of stabilization. Seeing my eldest son sitting, more blushing, eating slowly while I adjusted the napkin on his lap. It was a scene I thought I would never experience again. But what really touched me was when he asked for pen and paper. He wrote right there, on that small table in the hospital room. Then he folded the sheet and handed it to me. He said, "Mother, I owe you more than life. You saved me even when I didn't deserve it." I didn't answer, nor could I. I kept the folded letter inside my pocket, very close to my heart, as if keeping a request for forgiveness that still needs to mature before being forgiven. And so, slowly, the world found another rhythm around me. Mario started coming to my house every Sunday, always with that backpack lying on one shoulder. He ran to me and hugged me tightly, the way a child hugs when they feel safe. "Grandma, can I sleep here today too?" he asked, almost whispering, as if he was afraid I would say no. And I always said yes. That boy transformed my home. It brought laughter, messes, drawings pasted on the fridge, the smell of popcorn in the living room, and inside me, it also brought a kind of hope that I thought had died when my husband left. At night, while preparing his hot chocolate, I watched Mario drawing on the table. He made houses, trees, a huge sun, and he always drew 3 people holding hands: him, Brandon, and me, never Rachel. And that gave me a strange squeeze, because I knew that one day he would still have difficult questions to ask. But I also knew that this time I would be ready to respond. But while our side of the story was finding order, peace, and healing, the other side was beginning to miss it, the absence, the door closed. And I knew, in the depths of my silence, that people like this do not accept such an easy fall. They always try to come back, one way or another. The problem is, when they try to go back, they usually don't come alone. And it was there, in that period of apparent calm, that I felt a shiver that did not come from the wind. It was the feeling that there was still a shadow moving behind everything, a shadow that had not been completely revealed, and she was about to knock on my door again. I opened my diary that morning, like someone opening an old wound to see if it still bleeds. The pages were yellowed, a little crooked at the edges, with my quivering handwriting occupying each line. I wrote there so many nights of fear, of doubt, of swallowed silence. I ran my fingers slowly and read it aloud, only to hear my own heart respond. I gave my life. I almost donated my body, but I didn't give my soul. When I finished saying these words, it was as if the house breathed along with me, a slow, deep breath that I hadn't felt in many years. I closed the diary carefully, like someone closing a chapter that cost too much to write, and walked through the rooms of the house. The wood of the floor creaked under my feet, just as it creaked when my husband pushed his wheelchair toward the porch. I touched the doorframe, the kitchen table, the armchair where he slept the longest naps, all that held traces of a life that I carried entirely on my back. I took one of the folded sheets in the basket and automatically started folding it again, in that old way I learned from my mother, end to end, adjusting the fabric with care, as if it were a gesture of prayer. Folding sheets has always been my way of talking to God, not with words, but with patience. And in that instant, I felt that every fold, every crease, was a prayer for the woman I had been and the woman I could still be. Then I went to the bookshelf and took a picture. It was Adam's when he was still small, about 6 years old, with his feet dirty with dirt and a huge smile, the kind that illuminates even the most stubborn shadow. At that time, I thought that it was enough to love for everything to work out. Today, I understand that loving also requires strength, caution, and sometimes distance. I looked at the photo and thought about everything I've experienced since then. The sleepless nights, the dinners where only I listened to my own thoughts, the times when I was treated as if I were just an available body, and not a whole woman, with soul and history. But now everything weighed differently inside me. The silence that once tightened my chest now enveloped me like a warm blanket. There was no longer that inner voice telling me to be afraid, to back down, to obey. There were no more screams hidden in the corners of the house, just a silence full of meaning, a silence that didn't hurt, but liberated. For the first time in a long time, I felt that this silence was my own, and not imposed by others. I sat on the edge of the bed, where I used to sit when I needed to find strength. I looked out the window. The sky was clear, a soft blue that seemed to promise something I didn't yet understand. Maybe that's exactly how life spoke to those who have lived too much, with small signs, small pauses, small truths that only appear when we finally stop running. There, in that simple room, I felt the weight of age not as defeat, but as a testimony. Aging, I realized, is not losing value. It is to become the guardian of the stories that have survived time. It is learning that some victories are silent, and that some battles can only be won with patience. And as I stood there, holding my closed journal to my chest, I had a certainty that pierced my soul like a beam of light. Justice is not for those who fight the hardest. It's for those who can survive long enough. I survived. to betrayal, under pressure, to loneliness, to fear, and until the moment I was lying on a stretcher, seconds away from handing part of my body to those who just wanted to use me. I survived the worst, and that's why justice came. Not quickly, not easy, but it came. But look, as I breathed that air of tranquility, something told me that there was still one last point, one last piece of this puzzle of pain and revelation that needed to be fitted. Because stories like mine never end when we think they did. They hold one last whisper, one last truth, something that comes only when the heart is strong enough to hear. And it was at that moment, holding my journal and looking up at the Springfield sky, that I felt a shiver creep up my back. A shiver, not of fear, but a warning, as if fate was about to show me what I didn't know yet. And the question that kept echoing inside me was, what else did this story still have to reveal to me? On the last Sunday of the month, Mario entered the room with that light step, half jumping, half running, and asked in the sweet voice that only children know how to have, "Grandma, are you still going to sew me that doll?" I was sitting in my armchair, with the light streaming in through the window, and touching my shoulders like a blessing. I smiled at him, pulled out the box of the sewing machine, the same one where I hid my ring on the days of greatest pain, and took the needle between my fingers. I sat calmly, opened the fabric, and started the first stitch, a small point, then another, as if I were mending, little by little, everything that time has almost destroyed in me. Today, Adam is undergoing treatment and has learned to walk on his own 2 feet, without Rachel's shadow behind him. He visits me more often, looks me in the eye like he hasn't done in many years, and while he still carries guilt, he also carries a new desire to be better. Brandon remains steadfast, taking care of Mario with love and respect, and transforming that boy into a human being full of hope. Rachel, this one lost more than marriage. It lost its mask. He is responsible for his crimes, faces justice, and tries to survive his own emptiness, but that no longer belongs to my story. As for me, well, I found peace. Not that noisy peace of open victory, but the peace of those who know they did what they needed to do, of those who protected themselves and their loved ones, not with a shout, but with firmness. And it's curious how life takes turns. I was a mother, I was a donor, I was betrayed, I was ground, I was a resource, I was invisible. But when I needed it, I was strength. And today, I am free. As I stitch the Mario doll, I realize that each point says something different about life. We don't always choose what we tear, but we choose how we mend. And I've learned that getting older isn't about losing value. It's about becoming a witness. It is carrying on my skin, and in my eyes the proof that I survived the pain that tried to break me. If there is one lesson I leave from this story, it is this. No one reaches old age being weak. We arrive because we learn to recompose ourselves, point by point, scar by scar, until we find our own way again. And my dear man, or my dear who has stayed with me so far, thanks. Thank you for the company, for your patience, for sitting with me on the edge of this story so heavy and so full of truth. This like of yours is not just a gesture. It's a hug that warms my heart and helps this little corner to stay alive. And if you subscribe to the channel, for me it's like an invitation to go back to having coffee together, talking calmly, like old friends who understand each other by looking. Tell me in the comments of which city you are watching. I love to imagine how far my voice reaches, and in which homes this story lands like a tired bird. And it activates the bell, see? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. Now, before leaving, stay with me a little longer. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story. Because just like the needle that doesn't stop, life always has one more point waiting to be given.